Hello and welcome to the third in a series of 3 on QEM and CAPA systems. My name is Ken Peterson. I'm with MasterControl. I'm their Business Development Director of our Quality and Compliance Consulting Division. Today we're going to look at effectiveness checking and management review. Now, as we recall what we've done briefly in the previous 2 sessions, we looked at best practices. And we said that best practices key up 6 key ingredients. First of all, it must be process-oriented. By process, we're talking about it must accept all kinds of inputs. Inputs could come from a deviation or a complaint or an out of specification. These are the kinds of inputs that feed into the CAPA process. The best CAPA process these days are risk-based, so that we use a filter, a gateway process to know which ones are more significant than others, and then we put our resources into the most significant area. It needs to be compliant. Certainly with not only our agency here in the United States, but the other agencies throughout the world, across the globe, that are making sure that we do things in an efficacious and effective manner. Lastly, we need to consider the 2 E's in a best practice: effective and efficient. First, we need to be effective. And this, of course, means that we get the right answer to every CAPA we work on. We come up with the right action and the correct solution. And then secondly, efficient. Efficient means that we do it in a timely manner and that we get an advance on that time, that we don't slow the process down, and that we get through it faster than we've done before. So those things make up a best practice system. Over on the right, you can see the system that we've been working with. Again, the yellow balls represent the inputs. The lighter orange color is the command central. That's the issue review, the event review, and that's where our risk assessment came. And then the darker orange or brown color, that was the actual CAPA process, where we go through and have done things such as our investigations, set and play our corrective and preventive actions. And today we're going to look at the bottom part of that, which is primarily focused on the effectivity checks and the management approval. Our objectives then will be to look primarily at verification and validation. What's the difference between the two? Do we understand when it's okay to verify and not necessarily validate? How do they play out in the CAPA process? We'll take time to look at management review. What are managers supposed to be doing as they provide feedback? As they go through the different routes and the different components of the CAPA methodology, is the feedback effective? Is it getting us what we need to have a good, effective system? And then reports and analysis. Some of the newer things that are being done to look at information and use that information to make key decisions going forward as we look at not only the quality event management information, but also systems decisions, business decisions, marketing and competitive decisions that affect our livelihood here at our particular company. Now, friends, as we look at what we've talked about in the past, looking at our quality event management and our CAPA performance, certainly the most important thing is that we arrive at a solution. Now, there were a couple key ingredients to help us with those actions. We used our expertise, our track record, our experience, our wisdom, and then we also put that into a process, a step-by-step methodology that said if we did A and B and C, we got to D, and D was a good place. Now, I know sometimes it feels like we're navigating through a maze and we don't know what's around the next corner. As we look at the lesson today and coming up with validated solutions, taking solutions through an effectivity check and making sure that they work, it gets even a little bit more complicated. We're going to try to straighten out some of those bends for you and make that arrow just a little easier to understand. Now, with effectivity checking, why do I do an e-check? 1, it builds confidence that the solution is indeed going to solve the problem. And secondly, it validates that indeed it did work. So we prove that this particular corrective action did resolve the situation. And then lastly, it minimizes the risk for potential problems because it's within that experiment, within that validation, that oftentimes we learn the new information that we need to go back and adjust those corrective responses to get them to be even better than when we first deployed them. Now, as far as our chart, we're going to be working over here in the verification, the implement actions, the effectivity checking, management approval, and then lastly, we have our quality disposition. So it rounds back through the quality executive, and then they would look it over one last time, approve it so we can indeed close out the CAPA. I want to remind us, however, that where those 3 green bubbles are, there are 3 risk filters in this process, and we could have exited at any point that was appropriate. Those that we're working on now are the more significant, the more serious ones that required a corrective response and a verification to that corrective response. Well, conventional wisdom suggests that we indeed want to move quickly, but we want to move safely. We want to make sure that we don't have any concerns that are going to come back to haunt us. We want to make sure that we're doing things correctly. Yet, the ultimate goal is to eliminate the problem. And that, for today, is going to begin with the effectivity checking planning. Now, if we pick up where we left off last time, we have a corrective response. Our corrective response might fit something like this in a template. And here we're going to begin to think about, well, what would we do to verify this corrective action? I like to think of this as more of a planning element, where we're thinking through what are the steps required in order to make sure that this verification is going to be effective. And it begins with the corrective response. You might recall that we looked at what we called SMART, and we tried to set up our corrective actions so that they were indeed SMART. SMART then said we need to be specific. We want to make sure that we've clearly articulated what that corrective response was going to be. But as a bridge mechanism coming into our effectivity checks, we're now going to go back and say, well, what did we say we wanted to measure? We're going to indeed make sure that this check, just as the corrective action was aligned with the root cause, these checks have to be aligned indeed with the corrective response. We need to make sure that it's done in a realistic time frame and that our activity is accomplished in a manner that's commensurate with the business that we're in and the goals and objectives that are placed upon us. We can't have an effectivity check shut down the manufacturing line for several days when we've got targets that we need to get out. And so we need to keep that in mind as we consider what are our ideas, how will we go forward. Most importantly, we're going to confirm that the root cause is taken out. But as we take that root cause out, more precisely, what will you measure? Will this solution completely remove the root cause? Will there be some residual cause left over that we need to address? We'll find that out in our effectivity checking. Will my solution cause other problems? If it does cause other problems downstream in the process, or perhaps with another mechanism or another piece of equipment, we've got to identify those and go back in and adjust our corrective and preventive response to include those other problems and how we're going to address them. What will this effective check cost? We can generally find less expensive ways to do this if we think it through a little bit. Yes, I know, I've built some gorgeous experiments in the past, but we do need to consider that we're all operating under financial constraints these days, and a budget is important. And then what approvals will I need? Who has to sign off on this? Am I going to involve something that's going to need the lab manager's approval? Am I going to need something that's going to be disruptive to the manufacturing arena? Can I get away with maybe doing a bench test as a verification and then keep my validation down? These are the kinds of things that we're going to talk about. Now, for those of you that don't remember, QSIT simply is the FDA Bible. It stands for the Quality System Inspection Technique. And there are some good principles here. They overlay some good engineering principles, such as engineers would establish a verification or validation protocol. Verification output against the documented product requirements and specifications. Making sure that the test instruments that I'm going to use are up to date, maintained, and calibrated. So a couple things to check as far as a good engineering concept also applies to our verification and validation. We would want to use similar principles to make sure that our verification is going to go off without a hitch, such as making sure the instruments are ready to go, maintained and calibrated, and we're using good data that comes from them. I like to think of 5 key elements that make up our verification and validation. We started a few minutes ago with the planning process, thinking through what is it going to be that we require of ourselves to make this work. We're then going to move into verification. Verification is going to be ahead of the actions that we're going to deploy. So as we look at momentarily, you'll see that verification generally is a pre to the corrective response. Validation will be a post to that corrective response. And so we're going to treat those a little bit differently. So we have plan, we have verify, we get the actions all lined up, we validate, and then if we need to, we go back and we make some adjustments in that corrective response as we go through this circle. Are we using a circular process? Now, as I mentioned, the pre-correction is going to be more of a verification, and the post-corrective will be more of a validation then. Let's look a little bit more precisely at what we're trying to accomplish. And some examples. If we're on the pre-side, ahead of that corrective action, our verification is going to be things then that examine the specifications. We're going to confirm the design. Are we on track with what we originally had set? We're going to confirm the requirements. But the important one here is in bullet 4. We're going to build something that is not invasive, perhaps a test, something we can run in the lab, maybe as a bench test, maybe a limited run, some kind of experiment. It's going to be in a less disruptive manner so that we do this perhaps with a prototype so that we can build scientific confidence that our output is going to be what we want, and we're going to try to rise that level of confidence through that experiment. But this is going to be done ahead of deploying the corrective action to bring us that scientific confidence. So if I keyed in on a word here, we're trying to build confidence ahead of deployment. Now, validation, a little bit different. Let's think of validation more as a post-corrective action in terms of it's going to focus on the use. It really is trying to prove that what we did actually did solve the problem. And what we're looking for is to bring back evidence or proof that those changes indeed did work. Was the cause removed? Now, some of the things that we're going to have to look at in terms of validation is how long will we watch this, or how long will we let this validation go in order to receive this proof? Too much time is not a good thing. Too little time won't give us the evidence that we're looking for. So there's some key decisions that sometimes are a little bit difficult to make here, and we want to be careful with that. Do the corrective actions allow us to meet the intended use? And so we do want to go back and make sure that the fitness for use is not violated, and that we do in terms of change is controlled through a change control process if needed. As we look at QSIT again, and we think about what QSIT is guiding us to do, one of the core elements of that, as they give coaching to the investigators that go out to evaluate and look at organizations, is around effectivity checking. So here are some of the bullets that guide us a little bit. You'll see on the first one it says, determine if the corrective and preventive actions were effective and verified, and here comes the key, validated prior to implementation. So what we're going to see here in this first bullet is that when we look at verification, we're trying to get out in front of the changes that we're making or that we deploy or implement. Now, let me give you an example. Sometimes it helps with an example. Let's take a simple example. I've got a vitamin company problem. The label's coming off the vitamin container. Root cause. The labeling machine runs out of the glue substance at the end of each run. So as we go through this 50-minute process, we go through towards the end and we've got this particular problem. Now the corrective action is to switch to a continuous feed pump and rebuild the reservoir to accept the constant flow of the glue. Here we come with our verification. Our verification then is to construct a prototype and test in a controlled environment in a lab under similar production. So how is verification different than what we normally do in validation? Most of us jump right to validation, deploy the corrective action, and then we watch it through some kind of validating mechanism and see if it's solving the problem. Verification would say, I want to build confidence. I want some kind of science, some kind of evidence to show me that this is indeed going to work. And it comes ahead of the corrective action. In this case, we went into a controlled environment, put a prototype together under a very limited run, and then we looked at it in a lab environment to give us confidence that indeed that action was going to work before we spent the expense, deployed it, and disrupted all the systems that it may have disrupted had it not worked. So I think we're getting a sense for verification. Let's now look at validation. Back up to our little wheel up there. You'll notice that after verify came actions. These validations then will look at the actions or the corrective response that we're trying to deploy. We want to determine what is it that we're going to verify, in this case validate and measure. To determine how we go about it, we're going to have to put our protocol in place. How are we going to set up that validation? And what kind of statistical significance are we going to require to say that we indeed validated this process or this piece of equipment or this particular corrective response to the problem? So we might need to look at how many, how much, how long, what are our acceptance criteria going to be and our rejection criteria? What kind of documentation? Now, friends, this one oftentimes is left out. Very important. We need to make sure that we document our validation. What kind of documentation is going to be required so we can see their statistical evidence, our validation evidence, and then be able to reference that at a future point. So documentation key as well. Back to the QSIT guide. Earlier we looked at prior to implementation. Now what we have highlighted is, you'll see the tone as we look at these next couple of bullets, confirm that the corrective and or preventive action did not adversely affect the finished device. Well, where would that come? Pre or post? Yeah, that's post. So that would be more aimed at validation. Determine the effectiveness. This can be accomplished by reviewing the product, looking at our trends. These things are, again, typically post. Include those in your validation thinking. And then this last one, determine if there are any similar product or quality problems after the deployment, after the implementation of what? The corrective response. And if there is, we have to be able to go back and adjust that corrective action to pick those issues up and make sure that that action is improved as it runs through the CAPA then final process. So validation, a couple of lessons learned. Measuring the wrong things. As an auditor, I see this constantly. The intent was good, but they didn't go find the right individual. Sometimes you need to go find a statistician. You might have to go back and talk to a manager to make sure that we're measuring what is going to give us the most effective validation. Involving the wrong people. We need to make sure that if we're looking at this particular experiment or then this validation, that we get the right people that are capable and competent to help us build that in a way that it's going to give us the information we need. And then failure to measure for the right amount of time is probably one of the most significantly seen hiccups in the validation process. Most often, they let the validation run far too long at a cost to the organization that need not be incurred when, if thought through correctly, enough information was acquired to where we could close that validation out, move on, and cause a little less disruption. So let's go back to our example. We had a verification where we constructed the prototype. We put it in a test environment. We gathered up our confidence and our information, and it all looked good. We deployed the action. Now, after the action, what is our validation? To run 3 days of production at various line speeds, track the data, and confirm the new pump and reservoir meet the specifications without any additional problems. Now, if we did get a problem, what do we do with it? We take that new information back and we adjust the corrective action and then deploy a more significant, solid corrective action. Hopefully you're getting a sense for how we verify and how we validate. Everybody, whether it's automated or whether it's on paper or whether it's a good template that they use, should have a way to capture this data. This happens to be the MasterControl template. You can see that tasks were launched through the verification. We just finished with validation, so these would have been primarily validation tasks that were launched out. That data comes back, it's reviewed, and then if there's an opportunity for further validation and an adjustment, we can capture that comment and make that a new task as we launch out an adjustment to that corrective response. Well, there's a lot of different kinds of data tracking tools. A couple of my favorites happen to be here. I'm not going to review all of these. You're familiar with most of them, I'm sure. bar charts, benchmarking, we can use line charts, we can put an experiment together. Hopefully you've got people in your organization that can help you use some of these quality tools to do some of your monitoring of the validation. Some of my favorites that are a little less used, for example, a scatter diagram. Oftentimes we have a couple of different variables. We're trying to see if these two variables come together and correlate. A scatter diagram is a wonderful tool to put back in our toolbox to see if two variables are correlating or if they're discorrelated. And then we understand that we ought to be looking in a different area. Again, something that we can do as we do our effectivity checking. And then lastly, tracking may continue after the CAPA closure. Don't keep your CAPA open if you've got enough evidence to close it. You can keep the validation running if you feel like you need to gather a little bit more information. So much for effectivity checking. Let's bridge now to management review. Why is that important? Well, of course, it closes the loop and it gives us proof that we have indeed solved the problem and that it's accepted by those that need to review it, that are in the know, that have the wisdom to pass judgment or render judgment. It documents our solution, and it shows us then that management has been informed, and it provides accountability in the management track. So if we think back in terms of quality event management, the yellow was really kind of pushing the inputs forward. We had management review, key stages for management review, as it left the department level, like the complaint level, where maybe I took a phone call, we resolved it, and that management was informed. It could have gone into issue review, where the quality group starts to get involved, looks at risk filters, starts to think about what kinds of actions need to be deployed. Is containment enough? Do I need a corrective action? Do I need a preventive action? And it starts to move it down a new track with management that are reviewing the process through key stages in that process. And then as we went into CAPA process, and we look now at corrective actions and significant actions that need to be verified and validated to prove that we've indeed solved a significant problem, what kind of managers need to be reviewed in that process? Now, what I'm trying to build up to is these are different individuals. One might have been a department manager, another might be a quality manager, one might be a lower level manager, one might be a senior executive. Consider that as you build your routing and what management needs to buy off on each different component. So as we consider who is responsible, not only are they responsible, but do they have the right responsibilities over the individuals that bring forward that information? How is that information going to be communicated with those people? Am I going to run it from desk to desk as a courier would? Am I going to require signatures? Do I have those signatures in the right places in my methodology, my process? Are they electronic signatures? Are they written signatures filed in a folder? Think through how you're going to do this. Does it need to jump outside this site? Maybe a site manager or even another location needs to see this information. Perhaps we manufacture the same product here and we also make it 500 miles away. You've got to take that into account. Perhaps that other site is a supplier providing us this information, or a customer that's going to get this cleaned up response due to the corrective action that we deployed. Again, some frequent mistakes. Incomplete documentation. Go through your documentation, even if you're an automated company and you're doing this electronically. Run through the process, look at all the stages, make sure all of the handoffs are in the right places and that the sign-offs for management to review are in the right places so that we get the signatures right where they need to be. And then, as I mentioned earlier, if we've got the right managers in the right places, we need not leave the CAPA open for too long. As we look at management review and where we capture that data, give them a place to give feedback or to capture some of their notes in each of those stages. And as management gets better at understanding how to provide that feedback, what they're really becoming is more than just sign-off individuals. They're becoming coaches, they're becoming mentors. So as a particular element comes forward to me and I'm the manager, I might send it back and say, you know, I don't think that we quite looked at this. It seems to me that the data doesn't substantiate the findings that you're having. Could you go back in and look at why this would account for why it happened over here and not over here. I think that we'll find some new information. So give them the opportunity to be a coach and train them on how to provide that coaching each step in the process. They're not just rubber stampers as they say yes and it goes to the next piece. This is a key element in a good QEM and CAPA process. And then of course, after management review should always come a quality confirmation. Sometimes I see this, it gets a little backwards. Remember, management review on the back end, we're right here to now the final closure of the CAPA process. There should always be an opportunity now for the quality group to review that, put their final eyes on this and say everything looks fine, or to reject it back and put a note or two in there as they may need to go back in and ask a question. But quality should be the final, before the final submission. Well friends, this has been fun. We've done 3 in a series of 3. We've taken you through the QEM process and you've had a chance now to look at what sometimes is referred as a 3 loops in 1 methodology. The 3 loops being the green bubbles. Can I escape based on risk and take this out to the most appropriate action to get me where I need to be in my CAPA methodology? The yellow was looking at the inputs, and those inputs in a good process should be able to accommodate just about any input. We went through a risk-based filtering mechanism, and that was evidenced as we came out of the input into the lighter orange. And then as we thought about more serious issues that required CAPA, we moved only those which were needed into the CAPA process. As a wrap-up, I would just like to remind us, we do have a target. Now it's a little bit generic in that it cuts across different industry verticals like pharmaceuticals and devices and nutritionals, but we do have a target, and that is that as we look at that yellow, we're trying to eliminate about 80% at the simplest stage possible. If you think about then of that 80% going into that light orange, we want to eliminate about 50% of that with containment and correction. And that then leaves about 20 to 25, 30% to go into our formal CAPA process. Are we doing better? Are we eliminating death by CAPA? Are we pushing risk into the key decisions where we look at it in our process? I hope we are. Now, if we're doing that, we're then getting the kind of CAPA process that we really are trying to achieve, where the problems are getting solved. That's the half that we always focus on. But what about the other half? Let's take a moment and talk about something that we often fail to talk about. We've got the past pegged. Something went wrong. The present is where we did something about it in the CAPA process, a corrective response. We verified, we validated, we deployed that perfect response. Things now are feeling pretty good. But the other half of the process that we're not always using is, are we using this information that can be collected to make better decisions throughout the whole business? Let's look at that. Yes, we wanted to move quickly. We're moving safely. We've eliminated the problem. But what about collecting key data that we can use then to make good business decisions, decisions outside of CAPA even, decisions that help us in the marketplace, help us with our competitive landscape, help us to deploy new products and processes, help us to be able to make decisions as far as perhaps with our sales force and the way they might talk to their customer, maybe in services that are given to the nursing staff. A lot of this can come from our quality event management and our CAPA methodology. We can look at these business needs and establish data to feed it forward and make it customer facing, make it manufacturing facing, make it product based. Help us to make better timely decisions even in the quality arena. As we review these needs and establish better data, we can start to chart that data by using effective techniques like a dashboard, a report, a chart, a survey. For example, if we think about some of the more key elements that we might want to take some of that data forward and have available to ourselves, we could set up a dashboard. Typically a dashboard is 4, maybe 5 or 6 at the very most key indices that help us track something that's going to help us make future decisions around something that's important to me. Now, oftentimes it's department specific. Let's say that I'm in the manufacturing group, or maybe I'm more responsible for marketing. I'm going to take some of this data that's coming from my quality event management process, and I'm going to start to feed it forward. It might be a pie chart. That pie chart might help me with the kinds of audit findings that are coming out through my CAPA process. So maybe I want to set audit findings and customer complaints, some of these inputs, out of specifications perhaps. I take some of these specifications, some of these inputs, and I get a sense for looking at, well, what am I dealing with as a base indicator? Now, any dashboard then should be able to be drilled down. So if you're using just about any kind of system, MasterControl, Crystal, other kinds of reporting processes, I should be able to click on one of those pieces in that pie chart and drill down to the next level and start to get deeper information as I go. Another element might be looking at certain individuals. If I've got sales reps out there and some of that information feeds back to my CAPA process, when they bring problems back to the attention of the quality group and those problems are then entered as deviations, maybe I want to look at the individuals that are out there working with the customers that are feeding the deviations back. Are they doing a good job of capturing that information and bringing it back? I could do that, for example, in that chart down in the lower left. But this is an example of starting to set some charting options out. I want you to think about what kind of data would be useful and then set up some charts that would make that data relevant. In other words, if it's just data without context, it's really not very useful. But as you put context around that data, it becomes knowledge, information, things that I can make some decisions on. Most organizations are using something that's automated. This just happens to be an example of MasterControl, where we can go in and set up those kinds of charts, a bar chart or a line chart or a pie chart. I can go in and take any piece of data that's in that quality event management process and make that a field that's reportable so that I can then get some kind of information that's going to help me in a report to be able to dialogue or talk in more depth about that. Now, those reports you might want to consider a schedule for those reports. A schedule to a particular executive on a regular interval, maybe every Monday at 8 o'clock, irrespective of whatever's going on in the system. This report comes to them. It cannot be influenced by the quality team. It comes to them, and they get to see that information in a live and honest manner that helps them as they have to make some of those kinds of decisions. Other departments might look at things such as simple analysis, special and common cause. Oftentimes, as we start to group different elements, different deviations, different inputs, different CAPAs, we start to see a connection more along the lines of common cause. And that can be very useful as we move through the process of our critical thinking around that. I wanted to share with you something that I think is catching wind. I think you're going to start to see more of it. Something that we're rather proud of here at MasterControl. And maybe you can use some of these ideas to help you with setting up your data as well. We call it an event analyzer. An event analyzer is an agent that we put in place in real time that every few minutes monitors everything that's in your quality event management process. It doesn't care whether it's a deviation, a complaint, it doesn't care whether it's a CAPA, it doesn't care whether it's a corrective action, it doesn't matter. The software has the ability to learn and report based on what we tell it to watch or what that agent tells it to watch within the system. And then you are going to have it come up to you in a command central of sorts where you can keep only what you want and disregard the rest. So I would be able then to group or combine significant events, maybe a couple of key complaints from different locations, and launch them together into a CAPA. I could split a CAPA, say, what I'm learning here is actually thought I had one CAPA, but I've got two. I'm going to split it and take that CAPA and drill deeper, while this CAPA over here is going to move over into this area. So I've got all kinds of flexibility as I work with these agents, as we get a system that is able to learn what I put in it as my key indicators are hit. So in essence, it's kind of like being able to lift up the periscope, look above the water, but have the system itself do all the monitoring and collecting the information so I'm not overwhelmed with all of this data. And I go in and I put in key prompts where I want it to watch for particular qualities such as what is happening or where it's happening or when it's happening or how big it is or what the risk is. It converts into real time that ability to bring me back the data that I'm looking for. As you then think about how to automate these issues that are coming forward and what you're doing to monitor them in real time, this agent then brings me the information that I can look at, pick and choose, keep or disregard, take and add or subtract, combine into different CAPAs, split a CAPA, launch a risk assessment. Think of all the things that you would want to have in an automated monitoring process, and a process that learns at the same time and allows you to launch into different elements and then capture all the documentation and then give you the audit trail that you would just love to have. This is some of the kinds of advanced thinking that we're doing here at MasterControl, and I hope it promotes a new idea or two for you as you think about your process. Friends, well, this is our final wrap-up. Today we've examined effectivity checks. I hope you know a little bit more about verification and validation. Verification generally coming as a pre, building scientific confidence. Validation coming more as a post to guarantee or proof that that corrective action did indeed solve the problem. And that brings us then to the first half that we talked about. CAPA is all about, yes it is, about solving problems. And if you've got a good process, your problems will be solved. We started then to look at management review and then started moving beyond that in terms of reports and analysis and said, how could we use this data to make future decisions outside of CAPA? That's the other half of CAPA. And if you're not getting that, you're missing a key half that many organizations don't really use effectively. How could you take that data and make better decisions in other areas in your business? Marketing, the competitive landscape, production and process, those kinds of things. As we conclude, I wish you well on your best practice that you deploy and your journey along the quality event management continuum. I wish you well as you think about the critical thinking and the stages and the key stages that go in the process. I wish you great success as you allow risk to make your process more efficient and more effective. And lastly, I strongly encourage you, get your management involved. Let them know the power of this process. Let them know what kind of information can come forward. Make their decision making at all stages through the organization, whether it be at supervisor or senior executive, a little bit easier because it becomes fact-based decision making and not just inference or opinion-based decision making. Thank you very much for participating and listening to our last in a series of 3 on QEM and CAPA systems. This wraps up our effectivity checking and management review session. If you'd like more information, you can certainly go to our website or you can contact us by dialing the phone number that's listed here on this last slide. It's been a pleasure to give you this information. Happy trails, and perhaps we'll cross each other's path again as we continue to work on better quality through managing the CAPA process.